As promised, in this video, we're going to take some time to explore the ES6 let and const variable definitions. These are alternatives to var, and we're going to be using them throughout the rest of the course. After this video, we'll never use var again. Now, is there anything inherently broken with var? No. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of lines of production JavaScript have successfully worked for decades. The only problem with var is that it has its quirks, and it's easy to accidentally misuse and abuse, creating unnecessarily weird situations. Now, we're going to explore all of that, but to kick things off, I want a place to explore that. And we're going to explore it outside of the context of our React app. I'm going to make a brand new folder in the source directory, and we're going to call this one Playground. And I'm going to use the Playground folder throughout the course to add little one-off files where we can explore some sort of fundamental JavaScript feature outside of the context of a more complex React app. And then we'll integrate it into the React app and continue on. For this one, we can make a brand new file inside of Playground. I'm going to call this one ES6 let const.js. And once it's up, the only thing we need to do before we actually write some code is to switch Babel from processing app.js to processing our new file. Over in the terminal, we can use Control-C to shut down the Babel command, and then we can rerun it using the up arrow key to populate the last command that was ran. All we're going to do is switch this guy right here. Currently, we are processing source app.js. Instead of going into a file in source, we're going to go into the source Playground folder. In there, we have a file we want, the one we just created, es6-let-const.js. Perfect. And now that brand new file is going to run, we'll be able to put some code inside of there, and over inside of the browser, we'll be able to view that code. Currently, there is nothing that is expected. Let's go ahead and actually write some JavaScript. Let's kick things off by creating a var-based variable called nameVar, and we're going to explore a couple features of var real quick. We're going to set it equal to Andrew, and then we're going to log it out. And I'm going to log out two things. First up is going to be the static string name var. We'll be console logging a few variables, and I'm going to put the variable name here so it's easier to see what value this is associated with. And then we'll put the actual value, name var, the variable. Now, if I run this, this is 101 stuff. We get Andrew printing to the screen, and we also know that with var-based variables, we can go ahead and reassign them. So I could set name var equal to something else. It could be a function, a number, an object, anything. In our case, let's just use another string, Mike. Now, if I save this, perfectly valid. Once again, everything works. But did you know that with var-based variables, not only can you reassign a variable like we have here, you can actually also redefine it, which means I can make a new var called nameVar, exactly like the one up above. If I run this, the program works without throwing any sort of errors. This is perfectly valid with var-based variables, and this can easily get you into some situations where you're creating a new variable not knowing that you've already used it somewhere else inside of your code. You're then overriding that other value with the new one, and this can easily cause some hard to debug issues. So with var-based variables, we can not only reassign, we can also redefine. And this is something that we're not going to be able to do anymore with let and const, and that's good because there really is no practical application for this. So let's kick things off by making our first let-based variable by typing let. And just like we do with var, we can provide a name and an optional value. So I'm going to set this name equal to namelet, and I will give it an initial value. I'm going to go ahead and set that equal to Jen. Now we can log out that variable, console.log, just like we did before, starting off with the string namelet, and then we will follow it up with the actual namelet variable value. If I save this, we're going to get Jen printing to the console. Now with let, just like with var, you can reassign it, which means I can take namelet, the existing variable, and I can give it a brand new value. I can set it equal to Julie, for example. This is completely valid inside of ES6 let-based variables, and we get Julie printing to the screen. With let, though, you cannot redefine it. So if I try to create a new variable called namelet, you can see my editor is actually warning me right away. And if I go over to the terminal, Babel actually crashed when it tried to compile our ES6 down to ES5. We're getting an error, duplicate declaration name let. So inside of ES6, it is no longer valid to redefine those variables. If you try to redefine a variable, you're going to get an error. Once again, you can always reassign a let-based variable. That is perfectly valid. So now let's move on to const down below. We're going to make a new const by typing const, and we're going to go ahead and set the name for this const equal to whatever we want. We'll stick with the same convention, name const, and then we'll give it a value. And I will stick with Frank for this one. Now, once again, we are going to go ahead and use console.log to dump it to the screen, name const, the string, and then name const, the variable. Now, if we go ahead and do this, what are we going to get? We're going to get Frank printing right next to name const. That's exactly what's showing up down below. Now, once again, with constants, we cannot redefine them. So if I try to create a new constant called name const, and I try to set it equal to a new value, let's go ahead and use Gunther. This is not going to work. We can see the editor is already warning us, and if we save it and check out Babel, we're going to be able to see that we're getting an error. Duplicate declaration, name const. So with both let and const, you cannot redefine those variables. Now with const, you actually can't even reassign. So this is also invalid. The whole point of a constant is that when you create it, its value does not change. This is useful for a ton of situations. So throughout the course, we're going to be using these two. We're going to start by defaulting to const. We're going to use const by default. If we determine that we actually do need to reassign it, like we do here, we're going to switch it over to let. And we're never, ever, ever going to use var. So there are a few other differences between var and let const. As we've seen, we cannot redefine them. The scoping is actually a little different as well, and we're going to explore that down below with a new example. Now we know that var-based variables are function scoped, meaning that each variable is specific to the function that it was created inside of, and it can't be accessed from outside of that function. So if we do make a function, something along the lines of get pet name, we can create variables inside of there. I could make a variable pet name, and I could set it equal to my cat's name, Hal, and I could return it to whoever is calling the function, return pet name. Now, if I go ahead and call pet name, get pet name, I could access that variable via the return value. Whatever gets returned, I could create a variable and use it. But if I try to access pet name directly, that is not going to work. Console.log pet name. Even though pet name was defined and assigned in here in this function, it doesn't matter because it is scoped to this function. It is not available in the parent global scope. If I go ahead and save the file, the program is going to rerun and we are going to get an error. Pet name is not defined as printing to the screen. I'm going to take a quick moment to resize Google Chrome, and we're going to go ahead and switch back into the editor. So the same thing is true for let and const. Let and const are also function scoped. So if I change this over to let, we're going to get the exact same error when the browser reloads. If I change it over to const, we are going to get the exact same error. It is a completely separate scope. Now we could always go ahead and create a variable here, const pet name, and use the return value. That is going to work because we are no longer trying to access pet name defined in this scope. We're trying to access pet name defined in this scope. So just like var, let and const are function scoped, but they're actually also block level scoped. That is block scoping. When something is block level scoped, not only is it bound to functions, it's also bound to code blocks, things like the code block for a for loop or for an if statement. And this is not something that's true with var. So let's go ahead and explore an example of this down below. Let's explore the block level scoping, starting with variables first. var-based variables, we can make one called full name, and we'll set it equal to our full name. And we're going to write some code that tries to extract the first name. Now, I'm not going to handle all of the edge cases. I'm going to assume that the full name is a set of characters, followed by a single space, followed by another set of characters. I understand this does not work for everyone's full name, and I wouldn't use this parsing for production. What we're working on here, though, is just an example to explore block level scoping. So we're going to set up an if statement. We're going to check if the full name even exists. If it does exist, then we'll go ahead and actually try to extract the first name. Right here, we're going to set up that if statement, and in here, we're going to create a new variable called first name. How are we going to pull the first name out of the full name? Well, we'll start by accessing full name, and we will use the string split method. That allows us to split based off of a string. And we're going to split based off of a space. So we're going to split up the string into an array of strings, removing the spaces and splitting by the spaces. So we now have access to an array where the first item is this string and the second one is this string. If we want to access the first item in the array, we just grab the 0-based index. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and console.log first name, and everything is going to work as expected. I can save this, and over in the browser, we get Andrew printing. Now with var-based variables, they are function scoped, which means that this variable is scoped to the same scope of this variable. This is not a function. This is just an if statement. So I do have access to first name out here as well. Console.log first name. I can access first name. I can save the file, and the program is going to run. We are going to get Andrew both times. Now, if I change this up to something like Jen and rerun the program, we're going to see Jen twice. Everything is working as expected. That is because our var-based variables are function scoped. Let and const are blocked scope, which does include functions. It also includes the if statements, like exactly what we have right here. So to explore this, let's go ahead and switch first name over to a const. We can go ahead and save the file, and we can see what happens. What happens? Well, we do get Jen printing once. That is this right here. Your constant let-based variables are block level scoped, which means they're accessible inside of these curly braces. And our first console.log is indeed inside of the curly braces, so it works. The second one fails though. We're getting first name is not defined. That is the exact same error we were getting when we tried to use a variable outside of the function it was defined in. So with const and with let, we're not going to be able to access those variables outside of the code blocks they were defined in. And the same thing is true for let. So if I go ahead and set this equal to a let-based variable and rerun the program, we get the exact same output where the first Jen prints and the second one fails. Now, if we did want to define this variable and use it in both places, we could always pull that out up above. I could make a let-based variable called first name and start it off as undefined. I could then go ahead and assign it a new value right here, and I would have access to it here because it is in the child scope, and here because it is in the same scope the variable was created in. If I go ahead and save this, we are going to get Jen printing twice as expected. So it's important to note that when you are working with let and const, your variables are block level scoped. That allows you to create variables specific to those blocks, and that prevents us from having a bunch of variables that are bleeding out into scopes where they really shouldn't be accessible. If you do have a situation though where you do want to create a variable that you define inside of some sort of block level scope, I recommend using this pattern where you define it up above and reassign it inside of that block. Now, obviously, we could switch this one over to a const, and that would work as well. This value never gets reassigned, so there's no reason to use let. If I save the program, we're going to get the exact same result we had before, although we've removed the need for var completely. Once again, let's recap that order we're going to move in. As we go through the course, I am going to start all variables off as consts. Eventually, we might determine that some of those actually do need to have their values reassigned, like first name does. We reassign it right here. That is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with reassigning variables. If we run into one of those situations, we'll go ahead and switch that over to a let-based variable, and that's going to make sure that we're not able to change variables like full name whose value shouldn't be changed, creating a little more defensive programming. Now, we're never going to use var, so that's the order: const first, let if we need to, var never, and we'll be using that exact same system throughout the course. We're never going to type var again, and we're actually going to finish off this video by removing all of the instances of var from app.js. Before we do, let's go ahead and move back into Babel. In the terminal, I'm going to shut down the Babel command. I'm going to use the up arrow key to load the previous command where we ran ES6 let const, and I'm going to use it one more time to load the command we had at the beginning of the video where we're processing app.js. If we rerun it and head back into the browser, we're going to see that our indecision app code is indeed up and running once again, and now it is time to change those variables from var over to let and const. Actually converting the var-based variables in this file is going to be your challenge for the video. There are 5 of them. What I'd like you to do is go through all 5 and figure out if there should be a const or a let-based variable. If we never reassign the variable, leave it as a constant. If we do reassign it, that's fine. Just make that particular variable a let variable. Take some time to knock this one out, then save the file and test your work. Make sure the application does still run without any errors. When you're done, you can go ahead and click play, take a moment to pause the video. All right, hopefully you were able to get that one done, and hopefully you noticed a pattern, which is that we actually never reassign any of our variables. So all of these can be constants. Right here, for example, app, that can be a const. Do we reference it? Sure. Do we reassign it? Nope. Same thing with template. Same thing with user. Down below, we have the exact same thing with template2. And finally, app root. All 5 of them can be constants. If I save app.js, everything works as expected. Now, would it work if I changed all of these to let-based variables? Sure, that would work. The application would work just like it worked with var-based variables. But it's a good practice to get into to only use let if you're actually going to reassign it. That's going to make sure that your program never tries to reassign variables that you don't intend it to reassign. So as I mentioned, we're always going to use constants if we're never reassigning. Only when we reassign a variable will we actually use let. Now, throughout the rest of the course, we are going to be using const and let extensively. You'll get a ton of real-world experience. We'll see exactly how it fits into a real-world application. I'm super excited to get to that. So let's move on to the next video where we're going to explore one more important ES6 topic. Then we'll get back to React.